and welcome to another Bangers and Classics podcast with me, James Ruppert, and him, David Malloy. And what's David been up to this week?
Oh, hi James. How are you? I've been up to no good as usual, really. This being the 13th episode of Bangers and Classics, I felt it was my obligation. I felt I was obliged to go up to no good. I can't say what it was, but it doesn't really matter. But on a more pressing note, have there been any more sightings of MGBs, MGB GTs? That is.
No, well, yeah, as you say, as this is episode 12A, as we like to call it, on the superstitious side of the podcast arena. No, I do have quite an interesting Mini. I have one of those Minis where it's an e-registration, which puts it in the 1980s. But if you look at it, it's been modified, so it isn't. The doors are definitely 80s, but the front and rear are old school, so it's very confusing in a way. But I suppose at least they kept the original registration, and they're not saying it's a 1960s Mini. But yeah, I do have to send you a picture of that because it's another one of my over the road, out of focused pictures designed to confuse and amuse people.
Our man in the used car lots.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
He brings that. But the strange thing is that this car's been around at least a year, so it's not getting people very excited. And I think it's yours, David, for 10,999. Because I think you said your budget was 10,899. So we're a tiny bit out there. We'll have to do a bit of negotiation with him. But yeah, I will post that at some point. I have though, David, joined the modern world. I've joined the 21st century. In that I've actually bought an OBD tool to interrogate a modern car's electrics. How mad is that?
Right.
It's still in its packet. And I did have a brief conversation with our good friend Kenny, who is a professional mechanic, about the whole world of OBD interrogation. He has lots of amusing stories on that line. But yeah, I seem to have it because I don't know. I've managed to get this far, but I can see on my shelf now. I actually bought about 35 years ago a BMW reset tool. There was, if you ever remember that on BMWs, there was these annoying little lights that would go from green to red. And when they were red, you had to go and get it serviced for some incredible amount of money. But if you had obviously one of these reset tools, which I think has the most simple electronics in the world inside of it, it would just turn those red lights to green, which is quite incredible. So actually, I have been ahead of the curve. There was me thinking I was way behind the times. Although I think with those reset tools, I think you could do something with a paperclip, which did pretty much the same thing. And maybe made your hair stand on end as well. But but I mean, talking of brand new cars and things, which we're not supposed to do on the Bangers and Classics podcast, you alerted me to some comments by the one of the people at VW.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Just before we go to that, though, I get really interested when you said you had a BMW reset tool. I thought maybe it could reset the whole company, which would be great.
It would be if it could reset the whole design, the whole design and the purpose, and
not forgetting the marketing.
The marketing as well. That's right. Yeah, they really have lost their ways. Obviously, I have thrown my hat in the ring with my previous experience, but they've ignored me for some reason, David. And I was quite happy to work for a couple of million quid a year. But there you go.
Anyway, yes, the chap from VW. Where do we start with that? Well, cars are apparently now software-driven appliances. Really? Well, count me out, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. They can have some software in them if it makes them better, if it makes the whole ownership experience better. But it's as you've said to me, it is complication for its own sake. It doesn't really advance anything. It doesn't make them better to drive. It just means I think they can have a lot more control over what you do with the car rather than you having control over the car. And I think that's what Bangers and Classics drivers want. They want to enjoy the experience and not be beeped at. I think really.
Yeah, I mean, I've nothing against software. I've nothing against engine management systems that, if they make the car more energy efficient, if they reduce emissions, that kind of thing. Absolutely. If it makes the car safer, then if it makes it cleaner, I'm all for it. But being able to, for example, turn on your central heating from your car dashboard, what's the point? You've got controls in the house. Use those instead.
That's right. Or you just phone the wife.
Oh, controversial. Yes, well, it's like we don't have a vacuum cleaner in this house, James. I don't have a vacuum cleaner. I've got a life. Wait for the brush. And I should imagine she'll be probably hitting me about the head with it later for that comment.
Quite right too, absolutely.
Yes, I know. This is terribly, terribly sexist. We're a bad lot in Bangers and Classics. But what can we do? I mean, we were taken over last week by a bunch of guys in Toyota Hiluxes, so,
Absolutely.
That's it, yes. So, this week's topics, what shall we look at first? Oh, now, things no motorist should leave home without. Well, I'm going to say, first of all, trousers. What do you say?
Well, I do have to go along with that. Although lots of delivery drivers I see these days don't wear trousers; they wear shorts, don't they? The postman wears shorts. I mean, I don't know what happened to the sartorial elegance of the professional driver, but many years ago, my uncle used to be a chauffeur, and he certainly wouldn't wear shorts. He'd have proper ironed trousers. And I think you're completely correct on that. But perhaps we're meant to consider something a bit more serious.
Well, I was being serious. You could get pulled for that one. Yes, okay. Well, obviously you shouldn't leave home without a first aid kit in your car. Obviously, warning triangle. I would always take spare water along, a bottle of water, maybe something to munch on, because you never know, your car could break down somewhere. You could wait for a rescue, and particularly in the winter, you just don't know what the weather's going to do. You could get snowed in. It's nearly happened to me a couple of times.
Absolutely. And actually, I can't stop going back to your trousers because I used to work with somebody, and I can't say his name really, but he used to. I don't know. He was a man about town. He was. He wasn't bound by convention, and he always used to carry a spare set of clothes in the back of the vehicle. For those sorts of eventualities. And I was reminded of it the other day because, a friend of a friend said, why have you got a full suit in the back of your car? And he said, well, you never know when you need it. But I can't go down that route. But I think we know that he used to make, he used to do sleepovers. There you go. If he got lucky. So, he always had a suit in the back of his car. I just like to think of, the fact that there's all these podcast fans with their notepads thinking, it should be socket set, shouldn't it? Flamethrower, fire extinguisher. And there we are talking about trousers.
Yeah, well, trousers,
It's fantastic, isn't it?
It is, well.
Fantastically not useful at all.
It's irreverent. Yeah. Well, with that nonsense concluded for now, let's just take a short break. It's the 13th edition of the Bangers and Classics podcast. So, welcome back after that short break. We used to change James' oil again, but not his filter this time. No, he's perfectly good with the original one. Is that right, James?
There is no filter with me, I'm afraid. I do operate without one, and that's got me into an immense amount of trouble over the years, but there you go.
Yeah, but you just charm your way out of it, don't you?
Well, you say that, but there you go.
Yeah. Silver tongue sophisticate you.
Yeah, all those restraining orders I have, but
Talking of one-offs and originals, such as yourself, would you prefer a car to be original or restored if we're talking about a classic?
It's very, very difficult because, the circumstances that mean a car is original can sometimes be very exceptional. It's a bit like, if a car is properly used, like used day to day, most pretty old cars rust away. That's just going to happen. We get into the world of barn finds, which maybe we can go down that very dark and dingy dead end. But really, if you've used the car properly, as it was intended, most cars from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, honestly, after 10 years, they need a bit of work. They're always going to need a bit of work. They're never going to be original. You're always going to have to replace stuff, and that's just the way that it is. And it'd be very, very exceptional for cars to be completely unrestored, and even to be fussy about that. So I think it does depend. I mean, I base that on owning an awful lot of minis, in that I know that they just rust to nothing, and so certain parts of your mini remained original, but really, an awful lot of it just fades away to dust.
It's like Trigger's broom, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is that's exactly the case, and I think it's just use the car. Okay, if it's original, that's great. If you have to restore it so that you can use it, that's great too. So I think it works most ways, but I just think for most vehicles you do have to do something. If they are genuine ones and they're not, they've done 3 miles and they've lived in, a showroom or a barn for most of their lives. But even then, you still need to do some work on them. So, yeah, in a way, there's no such thing as an original car, is there, really? I could be wrong.
I was just thinking, James, when you mentioned barn finds, that it seems to me that there must be more barns in this country than I thought. And perhaps we are missing a chance at Bangers and Classics. We could set up the Bangers and Classics barn building company so we can build barns for people to hide their old cars in and then pretend the barn finds.
David, I've got a barn. I've actually got a barn, so I can do that. And it has a roll door on it. I can roll the door up. I can push a customer's car in, and then we can push it out again. And it is genuinely a barn find.
Right, because we could convert one of the stables back into a garage, which is wooden, so it kind of would look like a barn. It's pretty big. Yeah, that's an idea. But we could roll this out to other people, though. I mean, there's got to be a few quid in it for us there.
Well, strangely enough, actually, our barn is a corrugated iron barn, and I remember years ago talking to someone about it. But apparently these were used as aircraft hangars, and then they were sold off as army surplus after the First World War. And bought by farmers who use them to obviously put their hay in and stuff. I don't know how true that is, but the ironwork at the top, around the roof of my barn would suggest it is actually quite old. Although the corrugated cover on it isn't, because otherwise it used to leak a lot. But we've gone. Well, as usual, I've gone down a route which has gone into barns. Really, I've gone barn mad, really there. But I mean, I do agree with you on the Bangers and Classics front. Is that there's a massive opportunity there for us to make a lot of money.
Yeah, we've gone Barney in the head, mate.
Yeah.
But yeah, talking about barns, so you live in, I believe, a place called Norfolkshire.
Norfolkshire, very much so, absolutely.
Yes. Well, isn't there a sort of story about red barns there? It's not true, of course, it's an apocryphal story, but there was a myth about red barns in Norfolk being oriented in such a way as to point the Luftwaffe in the direction of London. Seriously.
That could work.
I seem to remember reading that at one stage, that there were red barns, and I'm pretty sure it was Norfolk. It could have been Suffolk, but I think it was Norfolk. And there was a succession of red barns, and if you followed them, obviously you're high enough up, you can see very far, that would take you towards London. Yeah, they were built by Nazi sympathisers.
Yeah, I don't think there was many Nazi sympathisers up here. I'll tell you what there was. There's an awful lot of airfields up here.
This is very true.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the legendary James Stewart, the actor, he was the base commander at RAF Hethel, where Lotus is now based.
Oh, was he really?
He was. Yeah, he flew all his combat missions. I mean, James Stewart was a pilot in the 8th Air Force. He flew B-24 Liberators, and his mission book apparently says he flew 23. The real story is that he flew several off the books to help encourage the younger members of the squadron. And there's a great story. Walter Matau, also a brilliant actor, was a gunner. He was a corporal in the US Air Force, and also based in Norfolk. And he used to cycle along to the base of where James Stewart was. He was the squadron commander. Sneak in just to be able to listen to James Stewart's squadron briefings, just to hear him talk.
A good story.
I mean, a few years ago, I tested for a magazine, a Lotus Elan M100. And it was the car in which the wrappers were pulled off at its world launch at the 1989 Motor Show in London. And this was the actual car, so I was really looking forward to driving it. And yeah, it was great. I mean, I must admit, thoroughly enjoyed the experience. The chap who was selling the car is based down there, a chap called Guy Mundy. Very nice fellow. If you're looking for a Lotus, check him out. We went along into the countryside and we pulled over to a spot where we could take some photographs. And Guy pointed out this is the aerodrome where James Stewart flew from in World War II before he moved to Hethel. So that was quite a treat for me, actually, being able to do that. But yeah, as you say about restored cars, all I'll say in the subject is that if I buy an old car or a classic car, I really want it to be as it was back in the day, as if it was new. So, if I, for example, if I could buy, say, a Renault 11 Turbo, I wouldn't want one that's falling to bits or lots of patina and, various holes. I'll come back and tell you a story about that in a minute. But I would want one that actually looked and drove as if it would just come off the production line. I know a lot of people would disagree with that, but, we've all got our own separate views on it. And I would always prefer a car that looks and drives as it did back in the day. That's just my preference. But some people take different views, and I mentioned a magazine test. I went to do one of another car. I won't say what it is or where it was because that would identify the garage possibly. But I got there, and it was a very low mileage car. I was supposed to drive it. Well, we couldn't get into it for a start. Couldn't find the keys. And it didn't matter because one side of it looked great. The other side, there were very large rust blooms all over the lower part of the car. And I said to the chap from the garage, I said, do you not think you should deal with those? He said, oh no, but we'd ruin the original paint. Well, it's not. There's no point in having the original paint if your car's got blooming great holes in the door. Anyway, I didn't get to test it. So there we go. Personally, I would rather have the car fixed, even if it wasn't original paint. You're still talking about a low mileage car. You're still talking about one in lovely condition otherwise. But there we have it. So anyway, we've done original restored. I think we've pretty much covered that.
And Barnes.
And Barnes, yeah. Well, I mean, Barnes Wallace. There you go.
Yeah, absolutely.
We could talk about him, but we probably better not. I don't think he had much to do with cars, unfortunately.
No.
Which is a pity. I'm sure they've designed a couple of crackers.
Yeah.
What should we talk about next? Oh, yeah, banger or classic. It's time for this week's banger or classic. And this is a suggestion that comes from the one and only Kenny. Thank you for listening to the podcast, Kenny, and thank you for your suggestion. And his suggestion is BMW Mini. So do you want to kick us off, James?
Well, I can do. I can go back to when it was born, the BMW Mini, because I went to an unveiling. It was before it was officially launched, and it was a place in Camden, so it was all very hip and happening. And it was in sort of a bricky room, so it was like the bricks been painted white, and they'd put this Mini in there, and there it was for us to see. And my sort of opinion at the time was it's a pastiche. It isn't really doing anything brand new. They've just looked at a 1960s Mini. I know the Mini really never changed very much at all, and they've just sort of reinterpreted it for modern tastes, I suppose, made it bigger and safer and stuff. Well, it certainly wasn't Mini anymore, and it certainly didn't have very much space inside. So me as a sort of a slight Mini purist, I just thought, no, I don't really get this at all. I mean, it isn't aimed at me for a start. It was never aimed at traditional Mini buyers who would thought, oh yeah, I must buy one of those. It was a retro pastiche thing. And I suppose the incredible thing is it was only a couple of years after when it came out. It was, the old Mini had only just gone, and it was quite incredible that it had lasted that long. But for me at the time, it just looked like someone sort of trying too hard. On reflection, it actually doesn't look half bad now. And when you see like the Countryman things about, which are sort of huge, ugly, and also the latest Minis seem quite ugly as well. Actually, the original one is quite a nice pure design, isn't it? Well, I think so. But yeah, way back then, I just thought, nah, it's just But what do I know about marketing cars? Because it's one of the most successful sort of brand relaunches I think that's ever been done. I mean, it's one of the cleverest things I think we've seen in modern times when it comes to taking a brand that you would have thought was pretty dead, really, and completely reinventing it, and obviously making a lot of money out of it, which was something that the original Mini struggled to do. So, yeah, that's my 10 pence worth. I don't know about yours, David.
Well, I mean, did they launch it in Penzance or Truro by any chance?
No.
You see, because it could have been a Cornish pastiche, you see, otherwise.
Yeah, well.
Okay, bad pun time.
Well, that's all right. Yeah. No, no, I'm quite happy to tee them up if you want to hit them out of the park.
Sort of shank them into the gorse
Yeah,
more like. But yeah. I wasn't a big fan of the original Mini, James, for the simple reason is that when I was a callow youth, I tried to drive one, and I found it really uncomfortable. My knees were up around my ears, etc., and I just couldn't get to like it because of that. I'm the wrong size. I'm too tall to really drive one in comfort. I didn't like the driving position. The sit-up and beg driving position. So I never really took to the original Mini, though. As you know, I do like the style of the Innocenti hatchback Mini. But it was a very important car for Britain as a whole. The Mini, it did great things in terms of basically bringing in money from overseas, which was desperately needed at the time. Of course, who doesn't love the Italian job? The BMW Mini, I've never really warmed to. I've driven one. I've spent some time in one. I felt it was a bit plasticky, the one I was in, the one I spent the most time in. Didn't really feel the sort of quality product I was expecting. And perhaps that was just because it was the bargain basement model. I really can't remember which one it was, but it didn't strike me as being a particularly great car. However, as you say, they were clever enough to take a product that had come to the end of its days and reinvent it. And reinvent it successfully. It's sold like hotcakes, and it can 20 years on from its launch or so, it still sells great. So you have to say hats off to them for that. Would I want to own one? No, if I'm being honest. Not even a John Cooper Works. It's just not for me. I'm somewhere between banger and classic in this one. I think it will become a classic. I just don't think it's quite there yet. But I wouldn't insult anyone by calling it a banger either. So to me, it's in a hinterland between the two. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think that's probably a fairly good approximation of it. I just think it's probably as good as it was ever going to look. As I say, compared to what they say is a Mini now, when we know it's a Maxi Plus, really, isn't it? Really, it is actually quite a pretty little thing. But it's just that what they should have done, I suppose. Well, no, it isn't what they should have done. But there was a Rover proposal that people would have seen, which was called the Mini Spiritual. And that was a concept car which, like the original, made a big benefit of interior space and very limited exterior dimensions. And that was what the original was intended to be. It was, a working class car, that was meant to be cheap and affordable. And maybe they could have gone down that route, but they didn't, and so it doesn't really matter. But if you ever get to, Google a picture of a Mini Spiritual, and you might go, oh, yeah. But I'm sure everybody here knows it. But that was quite an interesting route to go down, and I just think it's a shame that they didn't do that. But I'll tell you what, I'll just say it's a classic because I just like I like the look of it now. I didn't like the look of it then, but it's grown on me.
Yeah, I mean, it's got character still. That's probably why. It's not an SUV for a start, which is great. That's a big advantage straight away. And it does have something of the character, at least in terms of looks, albeit supersized, of the old car. So again, it's a really clever reworking of it. It could have been, as you say, like a Mini Spiritual. They could have went down that road, and perhaps the purists would have been happier. But what they've done, I mean, they made a good job of it. It's just... For me, it's just lacking in something. There's not much more I can say about that. So we'll take a quick break there. Live from Transylvania, where everyone's a sucker for the Bangers and Classics podcast.
One subject we sort of keep coming back to, because we seem to mention Wankel rotary engines every other week, is lost trailblazing technology or cars, which looked really good at the time and never really went anywhere. Or if they did, they went somewhere and disappeared. And I just wondered what you had in mind, David, when it came to regretting that nobody else copied them or the car didn't go on to a Mark II or a Mark III.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in that vein, I mean, I'm looking at one from France. I've got a couple of ideas, and funnily enough, they're all French cars. One I think about is the Simca 1100 Ti, because it was probably the first of the hot hatches. I'm in no way saying it was a better car or as good a car as the Volkswagen Golf Gti that followed it, because plainly it wasn't. But the Simca did get there first. If you don't know the Simca 1100, it was a front-wheel drive, medium-sized hatchback, launched in 1967. Quite an advanced little car for the time. You know, all-round independent suspension, hatchback, which was, again, not that common in the days. It was the second sort of major hatchback after the Renault 16. And you know, it was a good car. It didn't have the best engine in the world. It's the Vately Poissy overhead valve engine that sounds like a knitting convention in full flow. When they brought out the TI, it was 6 years after the launch of the 1100, and they gave it a bit more sparkle. Did a few things to it. You know, it had a bit more power. It had all of 84 horsepower from its 1300 engine. It, hang on a second, got my idiot sheets here. You know, basically, the TI, when it came in, it had a 1.3 litre engine, same as used in the Simca 1100 Special, but twin choke Weber carburetors, and it gave 81 horsepower, which was 84 PS, I think. Gave it 100 miles an hour top speed, and it could do 0 to 60 in about 12 seconds, which wasn't bad for the time. It had the internal modifications, you know, a little bit more sporty in terms of having more instruments and some red highlighting. Externally, it had a little bit of go faster accoutrements. You know, you had the alloy wheels and the badging, and of course the front and rear spoilers. I think they sold reasonably well, but you know, they were never sold in Britain. The Volkswagen Golf GTI came along a couple of years later, and people seem to think, that's the car that was responsible for the hot hatch genre. Well, it wasn't. The Simca got there first, but you could say that the Golf GTI redefined it. What do you think, James?
I should think you're probably right there. Simca was a mark that you used to see around a fair amount, strangely enough. And I do remember some friends of mine owning ones, and they were probably a bit rusty by the late 70s, early 80s, but they were interesting enough cars. And it's just, in a way, it's just a shame that Simca as a mark has completely disappeared as well. You know, it was quite, as you say, it was quite a cool car.
Well, the guy who designed the engine, the Poissy engine, was a guy called Georges Martin, who also designed the Matau V12 racing engine that competed in Formula One and Le Mans racing. Won a couple of Grand Prix and won a lot of world sports car races and 3 Le Mans 24 hours on the trot. And he would have made a better job of the Poissy engine if he had more money, because I know he later did some redesign work to it to give it an overhead camshaft, give it, you know, in fact, 2 overhead camshafts, fuel injection, etc. But the money was never there to put it into series production. But yeah, I mean, Simca was an interesting mark. Of course, it got taken over by Chrysler in the late 60s. And then, of course, Chrysler made a complete dog's breakfast of the whole thing and was sold to Peugeot. And all that remains now of Simca, really, is the factory they were built in at Poissy, which is, I think, still one of Peugeot's main factories.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, so the other one I was thinking of, it's actually 2, but there's one in particular that's an even more significant car, I think, was the Renault 16. The 16 was the first proper medium-sized or large-sized family car to break with the 3-box tradition and go to a hatchback shape, and that was in 1965. And it was some years before the Maxi came along to challenge it. But to be absolutely blunt, I think the Maxi wasn't a patch in the 16. But how many 16s do you see on the road these days?
I haven't seen one forever. I can't remember the last time I saw one, really.
Very nice cars, very interesting cars technically. Again, all independent suspension, front-wheel drive, rack and pinion steering. It set a template for the cars that came after it. And it had a long production life in itself. I think it was 15 years it was in production. But you just don't seem to see it being featured anywhere and being mentioned anywhere these days. And, you know, for such a seminal car, that's a shame. Any cars you want to mention?
Well, yeah, as I'm going back to maybe a time when I was a proper motoring journalist rather than a miserable old bloke that I am now, And there would actually be a purpose to me driving cars when they were brand new. I remember going to Honda, and again, this would have been 20 odd years ago. And I can't remember what I went to drive. There was obviously some new car, but they would always have whatever was in the lineup. And I don't think this had been discontinued at the time. I think it was still a current vehicle, and that is the original Honda Insight.
Oh yeah.
Which I really liked. I wasn't, when it comes to hybrids, it always seems a bit daft that you've got, an extra engine there. But it was just the point that they made this car looked like a Dan Dare Pilot of the Future type car. And they really seemed to make a hell of an effort with it, because later Honda Insights were just sort of really dreary Civics, and they were just awful, whereas this looked sort of fantastic. And I remember, whatever I was supposed to be driving, I didn't drive, and I just stole this for about 2 or 3 hours, and I just went off in it. So the whole time I was just driving this, because it was interesting on the outside. It's a tiny little footprint of a car. I think it was narrower at the front and narrower at the back and wider at the front. Inside you had a digital dash, but it wasn't an annoying digital dash. Again, it looked like the future, and you just thought, well, if all cars are going to look like this inside, it'd be good. There was fairings over the rear wheels, and they really, really made an effort. And this would, without really trying, it would do 60, 70 miles to the gallon. And it was just great. And it was just a nice little thing to hum about in. And in a way, you thought, well, if this is the future of cars, which it wasn't, it would be quite good fun. And I just thought they were just extremely good. I'd love to buy one which has a broken engine, because it wouldn't have a broken Honda engine, but it might have a flat battery pack and be difficult to replace or expensive to replace, and maybe put a sort of a Honda V6 in it. I think that would be really good, wouldn't you? Take one from an Integra or something and put it in there, and that might be quite a hoot. I would have said, but it's just the fact they sort of went down the hypermiling route a tiny bit, and this was a mainstream car, and I know it was a sort of slight trailblazer. They probably never made a penny on it, lost money on every single one, but it was just the look of it. It was a mini Citroen CX in a way, and it was just one of those brave designs that you don't really get anymore. And I wouldn't mind one of those. So I'll go and find one.
Yeah, better than the Prius, would you say?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I'll go along
because
with
it just again, the old Prius was one which never made any money. It was testing the technology, and if you're going to do electric cars in a way, that was the perfect way to do it. Even because it wasn't fully electric, maybe that was slightly deceitful, but at least it's made by Toyota, and it would never break down, a bit like that Honda, in that it would be very reliable and an excellent way to do it. But the Prius was very conventional, whereas Honda went out of their way. It was Honda being wacky, and I think that's what we miss really, is that car manufacturers used to at least put out a couple of wacky models wherever the manufacturer was, whether they were French or English or German. They would often just do something for amusement's sake, and I think this is one of them, and that's why I'd quite like one.
I mean, I have to say, Honda did wacky pretty well, though. They were, they were good at it, and they produced interesting cars, more so back in the day, sadly, than they do now. Though having said that, I quite like it's no longer production, but I quite like the CRZ.
Yes, yeah.
I know it's a hybrid and etc., and it's not that fast, but there's something about the way it looks. You've been thinking of getting one, perhaps. Depends if I can fit in it, of course. That's a blooming problem. There are so many nice cars I just can't drive comfortably, James.
No.
It's terrible. And, I'm only 6'3", but I've got a long back and I've got a dodgy neck, so I can't drive absolutely anything I want to, which is annoying. But
that's why you should be racing driver size like me. I can fit into anything really. So that's good.
Yeah, I'm rugby player sized, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, I was a rugby player once upon a time. Not a very good one, but I was one. But I think they should build cars for people that are rugby players.
I think they make a whole range of SUVs for you, David. I don't think you'd have a problem getting into at all.
Actually, you'd be surprised. One of the cars that I struggled to drive was, I think it was a Volvo, was it a 740, 760 estate? I'm going back a good few years now, about 20 years in fact, actually, I'm going back. I was sent out to see a client, and I just took the train to work, because I lived about 40 miles away. So my boss said, right, take my car, this big Volvo estate. I could not get the seat to go back far enough. I really struggled to even get my legs in it. It was no fun to drive. And I thought Scandinavians were quite big blokes. Well, some of them anyway. You know, I don't think the Vikings were exactly small in stature. But something had gone wrong there. Maybe, I don't know, maybe the mechanism wasn't working properly. Maybe my backside's just grown too big, James. I don't know. And on that sort of bum note, we'll wrap up this week's podcast. So I'd like to say thank you for listening, and hope to see you soon for episode 14, or 12B, or whatever we're going to call it. Thanks.
Bye-bye.